Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Unnamed Bracketology Podcast. I'm Graham Doran, as always, joined by Kerry Miller. Let's get right into it. We put out a Twitter question earlier this week saying, or X, whatever you want to call it, asking you, who do you want to see us talk about? And the answer was the Big 12. We wanted to go in depth on the Big 12.
By a narrow margin. I thought it was going to be like a blowout. It was like 35% for the Big 12. Everything else was 25%. That math's not right, but it was pretty close.
I
I
think
was
the votes
surprised.
came in heavy on the Big 12 to start, and then the other conferences started gaining ground
Yeah.
towards the end of it. But either way, the Big 12 won, so that's what we're going to discuss. And let's get right into it. The number one team in the Big 12 right now, the sole possession of first place in the standings, are the Houston Cougars. I have them as the second overall seed right now. Where do you have Houston?
I still have them at 3. I was torn. I wanted to move them up to 2. But I think Connecticut's just that strong that they're still 2. But well, we're going to discuss it in a second, but I think Houston could get to 1 overall in a couple of days here.
So speaking of that, big game for Houston. They go on the road to Allen Fieldhouse visiting Kansas, who I currently have as my eighth overall team, so
Okay.
my last two seed. What's the impact of that game, aside from the conference championship impact? Because we
Yeah.
know that's at stake. But when it comes to seeding, what do you think is that impact of that game?
Yeah, I think if Houston wins that game, at least temporarily, they move to number 1 overall. Purdue plays, I believe it's at Wisconsin on Sunday. So I think if Purdue wins that game, they would then move right back ahead of Houston for 1 overall. But I think they would certainly leapfrog UConn if they're able to get a road win over Kansas, even though Kansas has been a little bit down over the last couple of weeks from what we thought they were early on in the season. But I don't think this is really that important of a game for Houston. They can lose it and they'll still be 3 overall after North Carolina lost to Georgia Tech, after Tennessee lost to South Carolina. I think there's a very clear divide between 3 and 4 right now. Pretty critical game for Kansas, though, if they want to get back up to the 1 seed line eventually. I think it's going to be tough for them where they're at. I mean, the predictives have been, as far as the 1 seeds are concerned, down on Kansas all season long. But if they can get a win over Houston, that would be huge.
I totally agree, as far as Houston being in great shape for a one seed regardless, and I also agree that they would be overall number one seed for at least the time being. I think Purdue could get back up there, but even then, I actually think we're starting at that point to cross a threshold of Houston being so dominant and the eye test
Yeah.
being so strong for Houston that you almost wonder, even if Purdue has the stronger resume at that point, does Houston get it anyways? Just because the committee says, we think Houston's better than Purdue. And I'm starting to get to that point where I'm looking at it. You know how strong I've been on Purdue
Yeah.
for weeks and weeks. But man, Houston looks good. If
Yeah.
Houston can win in Allen Fieldhouse, I think they vault to overall number one. And I think I might keep them there, even if Purdue adds to their already impressive resume. Maybe for much the same reason that Houston was above Kansas last year for the committee, was they just thought they were better.
Yeah.
And I think that could be the same deal here.
Yeah. I think if both Houston and Purdue won out, Houston would absolutely be number 1 overall. I think if they're even if they don't win out, if they get the Big 12 regular season and conference tournament title sweep, they're going to be number 1 overall. But you know, bracketology, we're projecting what the committee would do right now, and I think Saturday night, if Houston wins, they'd be number 1. If Purdue wins the following day, I think they would be number 1. I might change my mind by Monday, but that's what I think it is right now. And no slight to Connecticut. I forget who they're even playing this weekend. It's not a massive game, but I think they would just get bypassed by those 2 wins over teams who are right there at like 7, 8, 9 on the overall seed list.
I hadn't even really thought of it until right at this very moment. I thought if Kansas wins, they're a clear two seed. If they lose, they're a clear three seed to me. But now that I think about it, maybe depending on some of these other results over the weekend, they could potentially move up to the back end of that one line, maybe
Oh,
competing for the fourth
I
one
thought you were
seed.
going to go the other way. They might drop to a 4 if
And I
they
think
lose.
maybe they could there too. But if they were to have four losses with wins over Houston, Connecticut, and Tennessee, That's a really, really strong 3 wins
Yeah.
to have on your resume at that
And
point.
Kentucky on a neutral floor. I mean, yeah. I mean, that's why we had Kansas at like 2 overall until they lost to West Virginia, right? I mean, they were really strong, and then they just kind of we've just found reasons to slip slide them. Like their metrics really haven't changed at all in the last week and a half. It's just now we can point to that loss to West Virginia. It's like you shouldn't have done that. All these other 1s and 2 seeds didn't do that. So yeah, if they win, I mean they're still going to be very much in consideration. I have them at 9 overall, so I'm one below you on Kansas, but I could certainly see them easily being the top 2 seed. And now that North Carolina, yeah, I guess they could get back up to number 4 overall. But if they lose, and if Duke wins at North Carolina, and if what else we got? Kentucky playing at home against Tennessee. I mean, there's a lot of big games on Saturday and Sunday. I think the 2, 3s, and 4s could really shuffle this weekend.
This might be the best weekend of college basketball, not just in this season. I think it's clearly by far the best weekend for the 2024 season. Might be the best weekend we've had in a number of years in college basketball.
And
The big games are just absolutely insane.
no accident that it's happening the week between AFC Championship, NFC Championship, and the Super Bowl. Like they don't schedule well all the time, but they knew what they were doing with this weekend.
For sure. Sticking within the Big 12, let's move on to kind of continuing this conversation. Obviously, we both think Houston and Kansas are still alive for a 1 seed.
Yeah.
Which other Big 12 teams do you think are still alive to potentially be that number 1 seed?
Yeah, I think alive, like, is it feasible if they win out? I think you could have 8, right? I think there are 6 realistic ones in certainly Houston, Kansas, BYU, Iowa State, Baylor, and Oklahoma. Then you get to Texas Tech and TCU, although I would hope that their non conference strength of schedules would penalize them enough that they don't get a 1 seed, but but I think those first 6 who are all currently on the 4 lines for me. BYU is not. BYU I was a 5, but those are all really really strong resumes. They're all top 25 in the resume metrics. Again, outside of BYU, predictives love them. They all already have at least 3 or 4 quad 1 wins. Some of them have. I mean, Houston has 7. They're Houston and Kansas are on a completely different tier from like Iowa State and these other teams, but there are just so many quad 1 wins, quad 1A wins to be had in Big 12 if you just get hot for 3 weeks. You just look at Iowa State. Iowa State was a bubble team 3 weeks ago, and now they're solidly a 3 seed, I think.
Yeah, I think an outright Big 12 champ will probably get to that 1 line. And I don't think it matters who. If they can win it outright, like you said, I think you could potentially have 8 different teams that could be a 1 seed
Yeah,
because they won the whole thing. Like if you're the committee and you're sitting there, you can say, "Oh, they had a crappy non-conference schedule." At the end of the day, if you win the Big 12 by yourself in a 14-team conference that's really as good of a league as we've probably ever seen. It's up in the conversation for being one of the best leagues of all time. You got to figure the conference champion's going to get there. I think it's very similar to Indiana in 2013, who was sitting there at 10-6 against the top 50 in the RPI. The committee said, "You know what? They're number 1 in the Big Ten. The Big Ten is a super strong conference. It doesn't matter what else happens over a conference tournament. Indiana's going to be a 1 seed
yeah.
because they won the league." And I think that's going to be a very similar situation with this Big 12.
I remember
I,
that happening once with Michigan State too. I think they had 7 or 8 losses, and it's like you can't put a 7 or 8 loss team, but they won the Big Ten, so they got a 1 seed.
yeah, I mean, it does go towards the committee's MO over the years, which is championships matter. You win a conference championship. Doesn't even matter if there's an unbalanced schedule. Just to win a conference championship has inherent value.
Unless you're the Florida State football team.
But yeah, I think it's 6-2. The one team that I'd quibble with you on is I think Oklahoma. To me, I have them as a 7 seed right now.
Ooh, okay.
I think the team that I would prefer is Texas Tech out of that conversation. Very bad non-conference schedule, but they've won some good games in Big 12 play. Already have 16 victories. I could definitely see Texas Tech being a strong contender. Not necessarily, a good odds-on team to do it, but they've already got a good Big 12 record. I can see them doing it. I
Yeah.
have them as a 5 seed right now. Um, Kind of keeping it in the Big 12. looking at some of the teams that are potentially in some bubble trouble, we
Yeah.
just mentioned Texas Tech. They've got 16 wins. TCU and Oklahoma have 16 wins. I think just the fact that these teams are already at 16 wins and they've got so many quality win opportunities in front of them, I don't see any of those teams missing just because they would have to epically
Yeah.
collapse to not have a good enough combination of record and quality wins to miss the field. Um, BYU's at 15 wins, very, very good predictive metrics. I think they're probably pretty safe. So, do you agree on all those teams being in good shape for the tournament?
I think all 8 of those I have a 6 seed or higher right now. They're all in my top 24, which is crazy to me. It speaks volumes to how good that league is, top to bottom. And outside of BYU, they all have multiple Quad 1A wins, and they're all going to get more of them before the end of the season unless they lose out. So I think those 8 are pretty solidly in. I think if Texas Tech or TCU just falls apart down the stretch, they're the most vulnerable of those 8 because they didn't do anything in non-conference play. TCU is 12-0 in quad 3 and 4 games. Texas Tech 13-0. So, you can talk about their 16 wins. That's 3/4 of them. So they would need to. I think both TCU and Texas Tech probably need to be 10-8 in league play because if they're 9-9, there's got to be a big question mark of what they did before league play. Are 4 of those wins against West Virginia and Oklahoma State, that type of thing. But I think those 8 are solidly in for now, and then Cincinnati, Kansas State, and Texas are the 3 still in the mix. Right now, I have Texas just barely in, Cincinnati out, Kansas State not even really that close anymore. Kansas State has actually fallen behind UCF in the metrics. That's crazy because Kansas State was, tiptoeing right around the bubble line for so long, and then they just kind of fell off really quickly. But I think it is going to be very interesting. Right now we don't know who the 9-9, 8-10, 10-8 teams are going to end up being from the Big 12. But I wrote down all the non-conference strength of schedule numbers for a reason. The 8 of the 14 teams have a non-conference strength of schedule 275 or worse. Only 2 of them are top 165. I've mentioned this on our pod before. I've mentioned it on Twitter many times. It's going to be a thing if these teams go 500 in league play and then expect to get in just because they went 500 in league play.
Yeah, I think for me, you mentioned Kansas State, 44th in strength of record, but they're 1-4 in their games against Quad
Yep.
One. They're 81st in the net. Really not looking good there. I think Kansas State is now well outside the cut line. They could still get back there. I doubt it though
Yeah.
because they just have such a tough schedule. They haven't really shown that they can win those sorts of games. Yeah, they beat Baylor at home, but some of these wins that were looking better earlier in the year, like Villanova, for example, not looking so good anymore. So I think Kansas State's in real trouble. UCF doesn't have any metrics in
Yeah.
at-large territory, whether it's efficiency, resume, doesn't matter. Some good wins. I wouldn't count them out entirely, but they're a long shot at best.
Yeah.
Cincinnati, I think, is right outside the bracket for me. They do have a great efficiency average, 32nd, an efficiency average of 32, not necessarily the 32nd best efficiency average,
It's
but
always fun to
yeah.
distinguish that.
Their resume metric average though is 61.5.
Yeah.
That's the more important of the two for selection. Good wins at BYU, TCU at home, but just not enough of them. Too many bad games that
Yep.
they won, right? They just didn't play strong enough competition, which can work for you if you're a Texas Tech and you end up winning some games in the Big 12. Flip side, you lose a couple of close games like Cincinnati, and all of a sudden you're out of the bracket. Texas, I feel pretty good about. I
Okay.
think the Longhorns, I have them as a 10 seed, but a solid 10 seed. Feel more like they're a 9 seed than I do an 11. I think Texas, not a lock by any means, not even close to a lock. I think they are on the bubble, but I think they're going to get there. They already have the good victories at Oklahoma, Baylor at home, at Cincinnati. They're 61st in KPI, but they are top 42 in the other 4 metrics. So I think KPI is kind of the outlier, and that's because they didn't necessarily play the strongest out of conference strength schedule.
putting it lightly. Yeah.
But they do have those quality wins, and especially they won on the road. I think that could be a big determining factor for the committee when they get together. Uh, Again, they won at Oklahoma by 15 points. Pretty impressive. So if I had to guess, I think the Big 12 is probably going to get 9 teams in.
I would agree
Uh,
with that. Yeah.
I would say 10 is more likely than 8.
Yeah, that sounds right. Again, it will depend on who those teams right on the bubble are. If it's Cincinnati with a 296 non-conference schedule, if it's TCU at 334, if UCF gets into the mix at 333, that's going to be key. How bad is that schedule? And that's not the be all end all, but it is something that the committee will always hammer you for if you're on the bubble.
Moving on to discuss the strength of record of the top 16 teams in the country. Why we're bringing this up is because at this time last year, 14 of the top 16 teams in strength of record ended up becoming not just tournament teams, but top 4 seeds. Only 2 teams in the top 16 of strength of record on February 1st, 2023, didn't end up as protected seeds. Who do you think is top 16 in strength of record today that is most likely to not end up as a top 4 seed?
It's absolutely Ole Miss. I have Ole Miss as an 8 or a 9 seed right now, so I don't think they're going to be a 4 seed. I know they are ninth in strength of record, which is insane to me. I don't get it. They're what did they? Where did I write it down? Ole Miss's wins at Texas A&M, at UCF, versus Florida, versus Mississippi State. Like those are their 4 best wins of the season, and they lost to LSU. Like I think the predictive metrics are a lot closer to Ole Miss, which is where are they? Ole Miss is 66th in the predictives, 57th in net, but 10th in the resume average. I mean, they're Memphis 2.0 right now, right? They could fall apart in a hurry if they were to, heading into SEC play. I think they were projected to go like 5-13 in conference play by Ken Palm. They haven't. They've picked up a couple of quality wins. They might be better than the predicted say. They started out 13-0 preseason. I think they were number 82 on Ken Palm. After they were 13-0, they were still number 82 on Ken Palm. They gained no ground in the predictive metrics by starting out 13-0. It was so weird, but I think that they just haven't proven to me with the quality wins yet that they are anything close to a 4 seed.
Yeah, I think Ole Miss has to be at the top of this list. I think there's 3 other teams that I also believe are going to fall out of that protected seed list at the end of the day.
I wrote 4. We'll see how much we agree.
The 10th team in strength of record right now is South Carolina,
Uh-huh.
so a second team from the SEC. I currently have them as a 6 seed. The 12th team in strength of record is Utah State.
Yep.
I currently have them as a 5 seed. And another team I have as a 5 seed is 15th in strength of record, Texas Tech.
The other one I had was Dayton, and I don't think they're going to fall out, but they are. I mean, basically, this question was, hey, look at the top 16 in strength of record. Who's not top 25 in the predictives, right? That's what we're asking, because we're expecting who's going to fall out based on what we think they're going to be, and just a lack of quality wins. Texas Tech does not have that. Texas Tech has 3 Q1A wins, so I think Texas Tech and Dayton are they're on the list, but just barely. I think it's definitely Ole Miss, and then pretty solid tier below that, South Carolina and Utah State. And I love Utah State. I think they are definitely the best tournament metrics team from the Mountain West. Like I have them as a 5 seed right now. I think they are the highest rated team in the league for a reason. They also only have 1 really good win, and I think when you're like that, if we saw with Colorado State, with who else lost at Wyoming? Was it Boise State? Like you pick up 1 bad loss in Mountain West Conference play, and that can just tank your whole resume, especially if you're Utah State. You only have that 1 great win. But I think it's those 3. Ole Miss, South Carolina, and Utah State are definitely the most vulnerable.
Yeah, I think it just speaks to this season. Kerry, we've been doing this a long time, bracketology. And I don't think I've ever seen a season like this before where we have so many teams at the top of the resume metrics, but so low in the predictives. I think it's a very odd year for bracketology. Last year, it makes sense that 14 of the top 16. That's a typical year. That's what we would expect. This is the odd year. This is the year where teams are completely outperforming expectation when it comes to resume, and we got to see what the committee's going to do with them because we are not used to seeing that big of a gap between predictives and resume this late into the year.
Yeah, I mean, pre-net when it was RPI, like if you would compare RPI to KenPom, there were always some pretty crazy outliers, specifically from the Mountain West for whatever reason. Like I remember, I think it was 2012, maybe 2013, when New Mexico was like number one in RPI. Like they could have been a one seed, but like the predictors were like, no, they're not even top 20. So I don't know. I personally, I've never paid until last season. Really, is when I really started paying attention to all of the metrics. I used to just be like, just RPI and KenPom or just net and KenPom. Now I look at all of them, so I think I am more in tune to the divides than I would have been before. But there definitely used to be RPI KenPom divides by a long shot. But maybe you pay more attention to the metrics than I do.
Well, I think, I mean, that's a good point. But once the committee started putting those on the team sheet,
Yeah,
and I think that was 2017 was the
I
first
don't even
year,
remember.
2016, something like that. It actually predated the net when they
Yeah,
started putting those on the team sheet. So it was RPI and these other numbers. And even the first year, they actually did what I loved. I wish they'd go back to on their team sheets. They did here's the average of all metrics. That was great. Bring that back, NCAA. That was fantastic. But so I was paying attention to it back then because if it's on the team sheet, I pay attention to it. That's kind of my general rule. If it's not on the team sheet, I don't pay attention to it. If it's on the team sheet, yes, I pay attention to it because it's the same exact thing the committee sees.
yeah,
The two things I look at, nitty gritty, which is basically like all the stats in one line, and then a team's team sheet showing all the different games they've played, strength of schedule, all that sort of stuff. If what the committee is getting together and sitting in that room and discussing up on the big board on their little computer monitors, I want to do the same exact thing they're doing. When it comes to selection week, I actually try to match their schedule to a T. I mean, I do
do you
this.
have the ice cream bar and everything?
But I really do this. I pay attention to when they say they're arriving in Indianapolis, when they're supposed to be going through the top four seed lines. I do the top four seed lines, then I stop. I don't even go any further because I'm like, if the committee didn't go beyond it, if that I'm trying to predict what they're doing at the exact same time, so I'm seeing the same exact metrics and team sheets when they start organizing all
Yeah,
of these teams. And so then I try to scrub at the exact same time that they're scrubbing. It's all guesswork to a certain extent, but it's an educated guesswork on what they're doing. I'm trying to mimic them to the exact extent that I can. So, keeping it on the strength of record topic, last year, the top 26 teams in strength of record at this time of the year ended up making the NCAA tournament. So let's focus on the top 30 teams in strength of record. Who do you think are most likely to miss the field?
yeah. I think from those first 16, the only one I could see missing is Ole Miss, and even that I think is a stretch. I do have them as, like I said, I think I have them an 8 seed. They only have two quad one wins. Where are they at? Yeah, two quad one wins. Neither of them quad one A. They do have that bad loss to LSU, so that could get ugly in a hurry. But I think they're probably okay. Got to go down a little bit to Indiana State at number 19 in strength of record. Not that I have any problem with the Sycamores. It's just Missouri Valley Conference life. They could pick up some bad losses. Same with Florida Atlantic at 26 in strength of record and Grand Canyon at 28 in strength of record. And because we're going to 30, Florida is now 30. I'm not fully on board with Florida yet. That win last night was awesome. I vaulted them. I don't even remember how high in my. I think they're an 8 seed now for me, and they were just barely on the right side of the bubble. But they were 0-6 against Quad One before winning at Kentucky, undefeated outside of Quad One, but they were at a position where one good win could bump them up 3 seed lines. If they had instead taken a bad loss, we wouldn't even be talking about Florida anymore. So I think they could fall apart too.
I feel like I'm James Carville in Old School because I'm sitting here at the debate and I'm saying we have no response. That was perfect.
I blacked out
Completely
there for a
agree.
minute. Oh man.
Moving on to kind of wrap up tonight's show. just like we always do, last four in, first four out,
Yeah.
focusing on that cut line of the bubble. Um, who do you have as your last four in?
So I have Texas fourth in, fourth to last in. So they're the safest of this bunch. And then, first of all, I hate all of this. I texted you like I got to 40. Even 40 was generous. Like I was already getting nauseous. After 40, I was like, do I really need to do the 11 seeds and the 12 seeds? Like this is bad. Like, and I saw you even tweeted out like, good news, bubble teams. You get one good win, you're gonna just vault into the conversation because there's just nothing there. So I Texas, I plugged my nose. I picked Texas, and then my last three are Colorado, Virginia, and Richmond. And my entire basis for those were, I just was looking at the quadrant records and said, all right, who has a winning record against quads one and two, and doesn't have multiple losses to quads three and four? And those were the only three teams left on the spreadsheet that met that criteria. So they sneak in by the skin of their teeth.
Yeah, I have Washington State, 42nd in net, 41 in Ken Palm, but it's really that Arizona win
Yeah.
that separates them to, again, like Kerry said, one really good win can be enough to have you in the field right now because teams around the bubble are lacking that. Nebraska, 32 resume metrics, so very nice there. Purdue victory. Some questions about their efficiency, but I think it's enough to be in for now. Providence has those Wisconsin and Marquette wins early in the year. Still looking good though. Those wins don't go away. They are 3-4 versus quad one, so very respectable there. Kind of like similar to Nevada last year, who got in just by having respectable
I
Q1.
will say on Providence, we had discussed like maybe 2 weeks ago about the injury factor. I think that's one team where it's going to be a big one. How they've played since losing Bryce Hopkins. That's why I keep every time I'm like Providence could get in. They haven't looked that good lately. So not to spoil the lead or whatever, but Providence is my first team out. But they're close. I just think the Bryce Hopkins factor is going to be a problem.
The final team that I have in, you mentioned Virginia,
Mm-hmm.
45 resume metrics, 45 net. Matches it with a 5-4 record against Q1 and 2. I think that just tells you that team is right in the perfect position to be in or out either way. First four out for me, I'll start with Richmond. I have them. They are so incredibly similar to UVA in their team sheet. I mean, it matches almost to a T. The only difference for me, and I mean this seriously, this is how close it was. Richmond's schedule 133, UVA's 122. Like that was the difference. That's how close they are. They do have that nice Dayton win. What really ended up costing them for me is that they had two opportunities on neutral courts against Colorado and Florida, fellow bubble teams. They lost both of them. They really needed to get one of those, and they probably didn't even realize how badly they needed to get one of those. But right now, it's those games early in the year matter. They really do. Butler, three quadrant one wins, but no metric better than 50. Feel like they're a clear out to me. Another team that's clearly out, Virginia Tech, just 4-8 against quadrant one. But they do have that Iowa State neutral court win, which keeps looking better and better. Boise State picked up a huge win last night. They have a neutral court win against Boise State. So still some nice wins on a neutral court to kind of keep them in the range of being in, but I think they're clearly out. And I think Cincinnati's also clearly out. Obviously, that nice victory at BYU does a lot of good work, great efficiency numbers, but they just haven't won enough. 8 of their 14 wins are against quadrant four.
Yeah, so I already said Providence is my first team out. I just keep landing with them at 69 overall on my list, so I think they're a nice team at 69, but I just keep leaving them out. Memphis, you didn't even mention them. You're that far gone on
I
Memphis.
think Memphis is way out at this point.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus.
They don't look good, period. If you're in the committee room, who wants to put them in the tournament right now? You just wouldn't. Naturally, it doesn't matter what their stats say. You would just think, I am not choosing to keep another team home for that.
Yeah, and I think it would be interesting if these last four games, if those had happened in November, and now they were picking up all these quad two wins. I wonder how we would feel differently about Memphis because from a full resume standpoint, it's not that bad, but it is impossible to get past the recency bias lately. So I did drop them out, had them as a 2 seed 14 days ago. That's insane. Cincinnati is my third team out, and then Xavier at 11 and 10. If people are considering Villanova at 11 and 10, Xavier actually has a slightly better resume than Villanova. So, and again, I hate all these teams. I don't think any of them deserve to be in the conversation. Gonzaga is pretty close, even though they don't have a single quad one win. I would not put them in right now by any means, but that if they were to win against St. Mary's or if they get that win at Kentucky, what is that? 2 weeks from a week from Saturday? 2 weeks from Saturday? It's coming up soon. It's an important game. I should know when it is, but that would be a complete season changer in a completely terrible bubble.
We talked about early on in the show, this weekend is going to be the biggest weekend of college basketball all season. So I'm sure we're going to have lots of interesting things to say Sunday night. Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Unnamed Bracketology Podcast.
Take care.